You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 6th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, Japan is days away from confirming its first female Prime Minister. But what will Sanae Takeichi be up against when she takes the job? Our Fiona Wilson in Tokyo is here. Fiona, what are you expecting?
I think it's going to be an interesting time. She's a veteran. She's fought her way. It's the third time she's tried and she's made it. There's a lot of discussion about her social conservatism, but also her fiscal policies, which are to spend big.
More from Fiona on that later. Also ahead, more prime ministerial musical chairs, this time in France.
Quelques mots spontanés au moment où j'ai remis la démission du gouvernement.
Just hours after forming his new cabinet, Sébastien Lecornu has resigned as French PM. That's just 27 days since taking the gig. We'll be in Paris for the latest reaction to that. We'll also have the latest business news from the Bloomberg newsroom on the way too, and more besides, here on The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. Hey, very warm welcome to this Monday edition of The Briefing. We are going to kick off the programme in France. We start in Paris, where Sébastien Lecornu has resigned as French Prime Minister, as we were hearing. For more on this, I'm delighted to say we're joined now on the line by Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief, Simon Bouvier. Good afternoon, Simon. They're going for some kind of world record, aren't they? What's that, 6 in... I can't even... I've quite literally lost count.
Right, I'll have a number for you. It's 14 and a half hours. There are flights that last longer than this government has. The Prime Minister, or outgoing Prime Minister now, Sébastien Lecornu, named the roster of ministers that were going to be part of his cabinet yesterday, and today he resigned. So, yeah, it is worrying, Tom. It is a bit different, in my view, than what we've seen so far. It is symptomatic of the fact that now the government is completely at the mercy of the kind of partisan ambitions of one party or the other, and the consensus seems to be more and more difficult to find, even for fulfilling the basic functions of the government.
Well, Simon, look, let's not beat around the bush then. Let's tear into those complicated questions. I remember you and I sitting in our respective chairs, but weeks ago, talking about the challenge of passing an austerity budget, trying to address these very profound problems with the debt to GDP ratio, a lack of appetite, understandably, throughout the country for cuts and so on. How much worse is that prospect now we've had this latest disintegration? Presumably it makes an almost impossible job yet more difficult still.
Definitely, Tom, because one thing to think about that is emblematic of the current situation is that although he named his roster, Lecornu didn't even address the Assemblée Nationale to tell them what his precise plans were. He was named on September 9th, so he didn't even last for a month, as you said. And they didn't even let him lay out what his agenda would be specifically. They just used the pretext of who was included in the government. And by the way, it was a government of familiar faces because it was nearly identical to the outgoing one, which was also not a smart move politically because it kind of sent the signal of continuity at a time when everybody wants something different. But if you don't even let the man say what he's going to do and you bring him down, that's kind of the end of governance and the beginning of just partisan bickering.
Absolutely. And that cabinet, it was the plus ça change government, I guess, right? Let's look at then the broader ramifications, Simon, because I guess this is predictable to a degree. You have the likes of Mélenchon, Panot saying, look, President Macron needs to resign. This is ridiculous. The far right, it's right in saying that, like Jordan Bardella, for example, has said, right, we need to snap elections right now. Perhaps predictable. Are those kind of views going to get any traction?
Well, I think they're getting more and more traction. I think, a year ago, the Mélenchon and Panot, whom you mentioned, were calling for the president to resign, and they were, considered clowns on the fringes of political discourse. And now there are more and more people who say the president's resignation is the only clear way out of this. The facts do not support that, because the problem is how divided politically the country is, and it is very unclear whether even a anticipated presidential vote would create a realignment of what the political chessboard is now. Same situation with new legislative elections, which look increasingly likely. They will definitely lead to some change, but the polls show that it is very unlikely that a clear majority would emerge even from these new legislative elections. So there isn't really a clear path out of this sclerosis, Tom.
No, and it's interesting, isn't it? We talk in so many different markets over the last kind of 5 to 10 years about this kind of crisis for whether it's Western liberal democracy or centrist government. Let's talk a bit about President Macron, though, Simon. Let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say your red phone rings there in the Monocle bureau, and it's the Élysée Palace, and they say, Monsieur Bouvier, immediately present yourself to the president. He wants to know what your plan is to get things moving forward. Allow me this idle fantasy, Simon. Let's say you accept the call, you head over there. What are you going to say to him?
Well, first of all, let's say, finally, I've been telling you to do this ever since you called these early elections back in the summer. But no, seriously, I think that there is one option that he does not want to take, but that he should try if he wants to be able to say in good conscience, I tried everything that I did to find some kind of consensus in the current configuration of the political chessboard, and it did not work. And that is to name a prime minister from his left-leaning opposition. I don't personally believe that that government would have much longevity, but I do think that he has to try that. Unfortunately, the alternatives that he has, a technocratic government, would never work, I don't think, because everybody has staked out so many red lines and so few green lines that anybody who is trying to make a neutral kind of governance-focused assessment of what needs to be done would be shut down by everybody saying, well, unless you give up on your retirement reform, and unless you impose these taxes on the richest French households, or unless you do this, unless you do that, we're not willing to deal. No technocrat can make any steps in that configuration. And I do think also that, again, the left-leaning opposition have staked their credibility on these key let's wind back the clock reforms, that there's not going to be a majority for that. So I think new elections are coming, but I don't think that they will clarify the situation, unfortunately.
Simon, last thought from me. You mentioned the C word there. Not that one, consensus you mentioned. And, talking about the crisis in Western liberal democracy and so forth, are we at this point where, it is the end of consensual politics in France, at least for a generation? I don't know whether that's being influenced by the kind of discourse we're seeing from the other side of the Atlantic. We're wrestling with similar problems here in the UK, although our two-party system is kind of still managing more or less to deliver actual outcomes and governments that can do their bidding. Not well, I hasten to add. The French post-war consensus, is it no more?
Well, I think that it's definitely changed. It's definitely evolved, but I think that this view, in my opinion, is a bit fatalistic. It kind of takes the responsibility for this situation out of the hands of the people who made decisions that led to this moment. Chief among them is President Macron, who thought that he was doing something very smart, and he was a kind of chess grandmaster, calling for these early elections that surprised everybody to kind of knock the wind out of their sails. And in the end, it yielded political chaos. It didn't always have to be this way. And I think his unwillingness, even in the face of all of this instability, to say, you know what, I think because of the path that we've taken so far, there is no other choice than to compromise on our end in a significant way and be willing to give up on some key reforms that we're so proud of and happy with for the sake of governmental continuity and stability, I think that kind of has opened up the path for extremists on both sides of the political spectrum to thrive politically.
Simon, absolutely fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us this Monday to give us your reaction from Paris. That was our Bureau Chief, Simon Bouvier, joining us here on The Briefing. The clock has ticked past 10 minutes past midday here in London. Let's cross over and hear from Laura Kramer, who's standing by with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. Rescuers in Tibet are racing to reach hikers trapped by a snowstorm near Mount Everest. Hundreds of villagers and emergency workers have helped bring more than 300 people to safety, but around 200 more remain stranded on the mountain. Heavy snow has been falling since Friday, catching many trekking groups off guard. Postal deliveries across Canada have stopped as thousands of workers go on strike. The walkout follows government plans to close post offices and end door-to-door service. Prime Minister Mark Carney says major reforms are needed to keep Canada Post financially afloat. And New Zealand has paid Samoa $6 million New Zealand dollars in compensation after one of its Navy ships sank off the Samoan coast last year. The vessel leaked oil and damaged reefs before catching fire and sinking. Foreign Minister Winston Peters says the payment was made at Samoa's request to settle the environmental damage. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Laura. More news coming your way at the top of the next hour. Japan is about to get its first female prime minister after Sanae Takaichi won the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's leadership election. Over the weekend, she defeated Farm Minister Shinjiro Koizumi in a runoff vote and is expected to be formally appointed PM around the 15th of this month. Well, let's get more on this by Monocle's First Lady in Tokyo, Fiona Wilson, our Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor. Good afternoon, Fiona. How are you?
Fine. Tom, I thought you were going to say it was Japan's Iron Lady, which is how people keep describing Sanae Takaichi, which obviously as a Brit is a bit upsetting, you know.
Well, exactly. Well,
Margaret Thatcher comparisons.
Well, exactly. Not justified, I guess, then, Fiona. So tell us a bit more about her. What kind of character, what is her reputation, and what do people make of this news?
Well, very interesting person, 64. This is the third time she tried to become leader of the party. She's a veteran MP. She's had many ministerial posts, great protege of Shinzo Abe, famously the late Prime Minister. Now, look, obviously, when you read a little potted story of her, it's that she's got these very, very right-wing nationalist views, socially conservative. Obviously, the picture is a little bit more complex, but she is known to be pretty much sticking to Shinzo Abe's kind of economic policies, which is, you know, a lot of fiscal spending. And really, she's really following his kind of nationalist views. Now, what she will do in power is a very different matter, of course. We don't know yet.
Well, there's the rub, and of course there's this sort of corollary. There's the attendant challenges of the situation that she inherits, where without an outright majority, you know, it's going to be pretty hard to push an agenda, even if it is quite sort of hawkish. It's going to be pretty hard to advance that or any agenda, maybe, Fiona. Just remind us of the backdrop, because obviously she inherits a complicated situation.
I mean, it's so complex. I mean, the big picture is that the LDP, this absolutely dominant force in Japanese politics, you know, since the end of the war, really, and they've pretty much been in power since then, is suddenly looking very shaky. They lost the upper house, they lost the lower house, Tokyo metropolitan elections. So they've really weakened over the last year. And Takaichi is taking over from Shigeru Ishiba. He's had a very rough ride. He's had all this to deal with and tariff negotiations with President Trump. So it's been a really tough year. There are all sorts of issues. You've got inflation, depopulation, some issues around immigration, which has really cropped up in the last year. People not happy about having more immigration. So she's got to deal with that. And I think, you know, people talk a lot about her issue on, you know, her views on social issues. But I think really what she's got to deal with are these economic issues and the big thing that people are worried about, which is rising prices. And I think that's where her focus will be.
Indeed. Now, Fiona, look, we were making sort of jokey remarks, Iron Lady, First Lady, all the rest of it. She mentioned she'd had these previous attempts at the leadership of the LDP before, I think 4 years ago, and also last year during the previous sort of battle for to lead the party. Does this reflect a change in, I don't know, the perception of women as political leaders in Japan? It is a bit of a watershed, but is it more just they've kind of run out of other options rather than reflecting any kind of broader social shift, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. I mean, she herself she's an interesting person. She's a bit of a policy wonk. You know, she's written books about policy. She's known to be very hardworking. Her big rival in this election, there were 5 candidates. The big rival was Shinjiro Koizumi, who's the rather glossy 44-year-old agricultural minister, son of a former prime minister himself. And I think, you know, a lot of people thought he was the favourite. Now, Takaichi has had to work very hard to win friends in the Diet. She's more popular out in the prefectures with the rank and file. But in the party itself, she wasn't so popular. And I think Koizumi probably thought he had it in the bag. It certainly seems from all the commentary that they thought he'd done enough. So I think ultimately what swung it for her was she'd been working very hard. I expect there was a lot of horse trading and positions being offered. And Taro Aso, the 85-year-old queen maker, as it is in this case, he's an absolute veteran. He's been prime minister, and he's the only one with a faction left in the LDP. They got rid of them all after a lot of scandals, but he's got a group of 40-odd MPs, and he said they had to vote for whoever won the popular vote, and that was Takaichi. So those 40-odd members, not all of them actually, as it turned out, did vote for her, but that's what really swung it. So it's not been an easy path for her. And, you know, today it looks like the polls are high. If they're not going to be high today, when are they high? But she's getting quite a good reception. Obviously, we've seen the Nikkei has shot up. Historically shot up, and so maybe it's a good start, but the next few weeks look pretty terrifying for her. She's got to get a coalition going. She's already in a coalition with Komeito, which is very much the junior partnership. It's been the LDP's partner since 1999, but they need to shore it up. They're looking at another party. They're probably looking at the DPP, which shares some of the views of the LDP. It won't be easy, though. This is a minority government, and if the opposition were miraculously to coalesce around a single candidate, which they won't do, by the way, they could present an alternative to her. So, nothing looks easy. She's a tough cookie. I mean, look, she's been a drummer in a band. Everyone knows about the fact she likes riding motorcycles. She probably hasn't ridden them for about 40 years, actually, to be honest. But she was a bit of a biker back in the day, and she's definitely she can stand up for herself.
Jolly good. And just look, you mentioned specifically, the tariffs negotiations with Trump, and just on foreign policy, because of course that is, we can tell from what you said, Fiona, that's kind of down her list of priorities. But in terms of foreign relations, it is an interesting moment. If she's more hawkish, if she's less interested in the face maybe that Japan presents to the world, might that offer us any pivots in foreign relations terms? I mean, let's look at, relationships with South Korea, for example, or with the US, or too soon to say?
No, I think that's obviously a big, big issue because, when she hasn't been prime minister, she's made a lot of comments. She's a good friend to Taiwan. She's really in favour of massively increasing defence spending, which is already increasing. Maybe Donald Trump will like that she wants Japan to spend more on its own defence. Look, Korean relations with South Korea have been very, very choppy in the past under Shinzo Abe. In fact, her great mentor. But recently, they've actually been better. And I think she'd be unwise to really rock the boat there. Same with China. Japan has massive economic interests in China. Really, economically, it would be a huge mistake to start talking, really rattling the saber about these nationalist issues. I don't think she'd do that. One of the big issues is that she's known to have gone to Yasukuni Shrine. That's the shrine in Tokyo. Souls of the war dead, which include war criminals. And that is a big issue. China, South Korea, hopping up and down whenever a big politician, particularly a prime minister, visits that. Now, she's been asked specifically, as prime minister, would she go to Yasukuni Shrine? And she's been very careful to say she will do. It shouldn't be a diplomatic issue. She'll do what's appropriate. So I think we might find that Takaichi, not Prime Minister Takaichi, is one thing. As Prime Minister, I'm expecting her to be more pragmatic.
Yeah, fascinating to watch how this develops. Fiona, great to get your take on matters. That's our Fiona Wilson joining us down the line from Tokyo here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And the programme continues as we tick towards 20 minutes past the hour with the latest business news. Delighted to say we're joined by Ewan Potts, Bloomberg business reporter. Good afternoon, Ewan. How do we find you this Monday lunchtime?
Hello, Tom. I'm very well, thank you.
Jolly good. That's what we like to hear, Ewan. Now tell me, actually, let's look back. It's interesting, isn't it? We heard these fascinating stories already today. News out of France, instability continues in governmental terms. And then from Japan as well, another PM. I said musical chairs. What do you, and perhaps more importantly, Ewan, what do the markets make of those stories?
Tom, well, today is a good day for Liz Truss. She managed 49 days as UK Prime Minister, but this morning at 9:45 Paris time, as you've been discussing, Sébastien Lecornu resigned after just 27 days as French Prime Minister. Not such a good day for French assets. They've been underperformers this year already, and French stocks, the worst major market in Europe today, down 1.3%. It's not a massive move, but French bonds also selling off. Now, the problem faced by France is not just that big deficit, similar in size to the UK's deficit, but also they're in breach of their the terms of European Monetary Union. They've actually got the biggest deficit in the euro area. And the problem remains, as it has been all year, that is trying to get unpopular spending cuts and tax rises through that fractured parliament. And really the path forward on that is looking pretty tricky. So French investors just looking over the scene in Paris and trying to wonder how they're going to bring that deficit down. It's not really clear how that's going to happen. The market story in Japan, though, is really the complete opposite. Stocks absolutely soaring today. The Nikkei up almost 5%, and bonds heading in the other direction. They've been selling off in Japan. Now, the market's betting that the new Japanese PM is going to unleash stimulus. She's a proponent of easy fiscal and monetary policy, so we should get more government spending and perhaps lower interest rates. And that should be good for companies and therefore stocks, but it's likely to mean higher inflation in Japan. And that, of course, is bad news for bondholders.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I will certainly keep a real weather eye on those, Ewan, in the coming days. Not just geopolitics, Ewan. I know you keep your eyes across all sorts of things. And this is interesting. You've been looking at soaring prices around the world for meat. Is that right?
Yeah, we talked last week about butter prices. I want to talk to you today about meat. Global meat prices hit a fresh record high in September. It was actually the longest run of monthly gains since the pandemic back in 2021. And the rally's been driven largely by beef. And that is to do with shrinking cattle herds in the US. Now, American cattle ranchers' cattle numbers are actually at their lowest levels in data going back to 1973. There are about 94 million cattle and calves in the US. Sounds like a lot to me, but that is actually a very low number, more than a 50-year low, in fact. And for years, ranchers have been reducing their herds due to a combination of high interest rates, costly feed, and persistent drought. The FT has actually got an interview today with the boss of Brazilian company JBS. It's the world's biggest meat producer. And he says that the growing use of GLP-1 weight loss drugs, the likes of Ozempic and Mounjaro, could be driving growing demand for protein. Users of the drug are often advised to eat plenty of protein to retain muscle density. There's been lots of speculation recently about what these drugs will do to wider food demand. You would assume it will reduce it. But it does seem that it's actually increasing demand for protein. So if we've got a growing demand for protein and a muted supply, of course, that means rising prices. Now, there's been some speculation that ranchers are starting to rebuild their herds, but we haven't really seen that in the data yet. And even if ranchers do start rebuilding now, beef supplies won't meaningfully recover until perhaps 2028 or 2029. So we're likely to see high beef prices for some time yet.
Ewan, that is absolutely fascinating. Thanks for revealing what lies behind those increasing prices. Really interesting stuff. That was our good friend Ewan Potts on the line, joining us from the Bloomberg newsroom this Monday lunchtime. And that, my friends, is just about all we have time for on today's edition of The Briefing, which was expertly produced in London by Laura Kramer and in Tokyo by Ryuma Takahashi. Our studio manager here at Midori House was Mariella Bevan. My thanks to them, one and all. We shall return tomorrow at noon. I believe Chris Chermak will be in the chair for that one. I'll be back on Wednesday, I think, for that show. I should know, shouldn't I? But from me, Tom Edwards, and the rest of the Monday Briefing team, that's your lot. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.